This story is titled, My Wife Left Me for a Richer Man Her Parents Recommended. Threw my engagement ring back saying it was too cheap for her, but years later she was shameless, begging for forgiveness when she saw my successful company. However, I had a new family and firmly refused. Sup Reddit, I'm 27 years old, and this is the story of how my ex-fiancée left me after 4 years together, calling me pathetic with delusional dreams. She got with her new guy the same day we broke up. 2 years later, my dreams came true, and I was thriving. The best part? I destroyed her new boyfriend's career. She completely lost it. Here's what went down. Let me start with how I met my ex-fiancée Victoria in the most ridiculous way possible. I was sitting in the library at 3 a.m., completely dead-eyed from coding for 14 straight hours. My eyes were burning, my back ached from hunching over my laptop, and I was running on nothing but caffeine and determination. That's when this girl with perfectly styled hair and a coffee cup appeared out of nowhere. She tripped and spilled her cappuccino all over my laptop. Most people would have completely lost their minds in that situation. I'd been working on the same piece of code for hours, and suddenly my screen was dripping with coffee. But I just looked at her and said, well, at least now my code has some flavor. Instead of running away in embarrassment like most people would have done, she actually laughed. That laugh was what got me. We ended up spending 4 years together, and we were engaged for the last 10 months of our relationship. 4 years of thinking we had something real and meaningful. I proposed with a ring I'd saved up for 8 months to buy, working extra shifts and cutting every corner I could to afford something worthy of her. When I got down on one knee, she said yes immediately. She cried happy tears and kept staring at the ring like it was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. She posted pictures on social media with captions about forever and finding her soulmate. Victoria would come over to my second-floor walk-up apartment all the time. My place was maybe 550 square feet on a good day. The building had what real estate agents generously called character, which is basically code for everything's broken and the landlord doesn't care. The heating was inconsistent. The elevator worked about half the time, and you could hear your neighbors' conversations through the paper-thin walls. But Victoria seemed to genuinely love it back then. We decorated the tiny space with string lights from Target and posters I'd collected over the years. It wasn't much, but it felt like home when she was there. Then there was my cat Rusty. Of course I named him that. My rescued orange tabby, who had this incredibly annoying habit of knocking everything off every surface he could reach. But every single night without fail, he'd curl up between us on the bed, purring like a tiny motor. Victoria always claimed she was more of a dog person and would joke about being allergic to cats. But I'd constantly catch her having full conversations with Rusty when she thought I wasn't around, asking him about his day and telling him he was a good boy. Those little moments made me think we were building something lasting together. Victoria's family was a completely different story. Her parents never said they hated me outright. That would have been too direct for people of their social standing. Instead, I got the death by 1,000 paper cuts treatment. Her mother would always give me this dismissive look whenever I walked into a room, like I was something unpleasant she'd stepped in. Her father had this particularly condescending way of asking about my little computer project with the exact same tone you'd use to ask a kid about their imaginary friend. The lack of respect was palpable, and their supportive energy was absolutely non-existent. Family dinners at their house were like performance art, where I was simultaneously both the audience and the punchline. They'd talk around me rather than to me, discussing their country club events, their friends' successful children, and business deals I couldn't possibly understand or contribute to. Every conversation felt deliberately designed to remind me that I didn't belong in their world. But here's the thing that made it all bearable back then. Victoria seemed completely different from her family. She'd roll her eyes at their country club drama and make jokes about how stuffy and pretentious they all were. We'd be sitting on my second-hand futon, eating Thai takeout straight from the containers while watching Netflix on my laptop that took 7 minutes to buffer anything longer than a YouTube video. During those moments, she'd tell me that none of the money stuff mattered to her, that she loved our simple life together, and that her parents just didn't understand what real happiness looked like. Looking back now, I realized that was complete garbage. She was already keeping score, already comparing our life to what she could have had. But at the time, I believed every word because I wanted to. I'm getting ahead of myself, though. Let me tell you about when the cracks really started to show. The first real crack in our relationship happened about 8 months before everything fell apart. Victoria's college roommate was getting married, and I was actually excited about it. I saved up for months to rent a decent tuxedo and buy a wedding gift that wouldn't embarrass us. Being engaged ourselves, I thought this would be fun, like a preview of our own future wedding. I was completely naive about what I was walking into. When we arrived at the reception, it was like stepping into a completely different universe. There were ice sculptures everywhere, a live orchestra playing classical music, and champagne that probably cost more per bottle than my entire monthly grocery budget. Everyone looked like they'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine, and I felt like I'd accidentally wandered onto the wrong movie set wearing a rental tux that didn't quite fit right. Victoria immediately transformed the moment we walked in. She fit right into that world like she'd never left it. She was completely in her element, effortlessly chatting with old classmates about their prestigious jobs at investment banks and consulting firms, their expensive new apartments in trendy neighborhoods, and their elaborate vacation plans to places I'd only seen in movies. She spoke their language fluently, a language of privilege and opportunity that I'd never learned. Meanwhile, I stood there nursing a single drink, trying to make polite conversation with people who would ask what I did for work, and then visibly lose interest the moment I mentioned startups. Their eyes would glaze over, and they'd quickly excuse themselves to find someone more worth their time. Victoria had specifically requested that we not sit with her college friends because they can be a bit much. But somehow we ended up at a table full of her parents' friends instead. Older couples with serious money who spent the entire dinner discussing their stock portfolios, real estate investments, and which private schools were best for their children. When they inevitably asked about my work, I tried to explain my startup in terms they might understand and relate to. That was a huge mistake. One guy actually laughed out loud and said, "Still playing with computers, huh? When are you going to get a real job, especially now that you're getting married? Time to grow up and think about providing for a family." Here's the part that really stung and should have been a massive red flag. Victoria didn't defend me. She didn't jump in with anything supportive about how passionate I was about my work or how much she believed in what we were building together. She just looked visibly embarrassed by the entire conversation and quickly changed the subject to compliment the bride's dress. I sat there feeling smaller and smaller as the evening went on. Later, when I brought up how uncomfortable and humiliated I'd felt during the car ride home, she dismissed my feelings entirely. She said I was being too sensitive and that I should have just played along better with their jokes. That was the moment I realized she was more concerned about fitting in with these people than she was about supporting the man she claimed to love. The second major incident happened just a few weeks after the wedding disaster. Victoria's mother invited me for coffee, just the two of us, without Victoria. This should have been a massive red flag, but I was still naive enough to think maybe she wanted to get to know me better or clear the air between us. I was completely wrong about her intentions. We met at this incredibly upscale cafe in her neighborhood, the kind of place where a basic latte costs $10 and everyone looks like they're conducting important business meetings over their artisanal pastries. She showed up 20 minutes late, wearing designer everything from head to toe, and didn't even bother to apologize for keeping me waiting. She just launched straight into her agenda like this was a hostile business negotiation. "I've been thinking about your situation," she said, speaking about my life like it was a problem she needed to solve for the good of humanity. "And I have some connections who might be able to help you find something more stable and appropriate for someone in your position." She then pulled out an actual folder. She had come prepared, full of job listings she'd printed out specifically for this ambush. The papers she slid across the table were all entry-level positions at banks, insurance companies, and various corporate offices. These were the kind of soul-crushing 9-to-5 jobs that would have completely killed everything I was passionate about and destroyed any dreams I had of building something meaningful. Every single listing was for work that would have made me miserable, but provided the kind of steady paycheck that people like her understood and respected. "These are real careers," she explained with the patience of someone talking to a particularly slow child. "Jobs with benefits, retirement plans, actual growth potential. You could start at the bottom and work your way up the corporate ladder, just like Nathan did." I stared at the papers, genuinely speechless at the audacity of this woman trying to completely reshape my life to fit her vision of what was acceptable. "You want me to give up my startup to become what, a claims adjuster?" I finally managed to ask. She looked at me with that same expression you'd give a child refusing to eat their vegetables, disappointed but not surprised by my stubborn resistance to what was obviously best for me. "I want you to be realistic about your future," she said firmly. "About Victoria's future. She deserves security, not fairy tales and pipe dreams. She needs a man who can provide for her properly, not someone chasing impossible dreams that will never amount to anything substantial. The conversation went completely downhill from there. She kept using phrases like, "when you're ready to grow up," and "Victoria needs a provider, not a dreamer." She never once raised her voice or lost her composure. This wasn't an emotional outburst. Every word was carefully chosen and designed to make me feel small, inadequate, and completely unworthy of her daughter. It was character assassination disguised as helpful advice. The absolute worst part of this entire humiliating experience was what happened when I told Victoria about it later that evening. She didn't seem surprised or upset that her mother had essentially ambushed me with a folder full of alternative career paths. She wasn't angry that her mother had completely overstepped boundaries and tried to manipulate my life choices. Instead, she just shrugged and said, "She means well. Maybe you should at least look at those jobs, just as a backup plan in case the startup thing doesn't work out." That was the moment I knew the poison was already spreading through our relationship. Victoria wasn't just failing to defend me against her family's attacks. She was starting to agree with them. The woman who had once claimed to love our simple life together was now suggesting I abandon my dreams for the security her mother demanded. That's when I realized I was fighting a losing battle against people who would never accept me as I was. The beginning of the end started with what Victoria described as just a casual family dinner. She asked me to wear a blazer, which should have been my first clue that this wasn't going to be the intimate family gathering she had described. When I showed up to their estate, and yes, it's definitely big enough to call an estate, I immediately realized I'd been completely misled about what this evening would entail. The driveway looked like a luxury car dealership showroom. There were BMWs, Mercedes-Benzes, and a couple of Audis scattered around like this was some kind of high-end automotive convention. My 2010 Honda Civic with the dent in the bumper and the check engine light that had been on since Obama was president looked like it had wandered into completely the wrong neighborhood. I felt embarrassed just walking past all those expensive vehicles to get to the front door. The real kicker was that this wasn't actually just family at all. Victoria's father had strategically invited his business associates and their sons' guys who looked like they'd stepped straight out of a LinkedIn success story. These were men with Ivy League educations, summer internships at Goldman Sachs, and fathers who play golf with senators on the weekends. They were the kind of people who use summer as a verb and think a $200 dinner is casual dining. The conversation throughout the evening flowed like they were all reading from the exact same script. Investment strategies, European vacations, property portfolios, and business deals dominated every discussion. Meanwhile, I'm sitting over here with my most exciting recent purchase being name brand cereal instead of the store brand, because I'd had a particularly good week with my startup. Real thrilling stuff compared to their stories about wine tastings in Tuscany and ski trips to Switzerland. Then came the targeted questions, delivered with surgical precision and obvious coordination. "So you're still working on that little tech project?" Victoria's father asked, with the kind of condescending smile that made my skin crawl. "It's a startup," I corrected, trying not to sound defensive even though I absolutely was. "We're in early development, but we're making solid progress and gaining momentum." I didn't mention that our last investor meeting had been a complete disaster, or that my co-founder Tyler and I had been pulling 85-hour weeks trying to fix a critical bug in our prototype that was making it crash every single time someone tried to upload a file larger than 60 megabytes. Technical difficulties aside, we were completely broken running on fumes, surviving on ramen noodles and whatever free food we could find at networking events. One of his friends, this guy with perfect teeth and a February tan that screamed, "I winter in Florida," chuckled like I had just told him the earth was flat. "Tech is so volatile these days," he said, with the authority of someone who'd never written a line of code in his life. "Are you sure it's a wise investment of your time and energy? Maybe a backup plan wouldn't hurt, something more traditional and stable." The condescension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and every word felt like a deliberate attack on everything I was working toward. And here's the part that really stung, and should have been the final warning sign. Victoria didn't say a single word in my defense. Usually she'd jump in with something supportive about how passionate I was about the work, or how much she believed in what we were building together. This time, there was absolutely nothing but uncomfortable silence from the woman who was supposed to be my partner. Then they brought out Nathan like he was some kind of trophy to parade around. Victoria's mother introduced him like he was the second coming of Christ himself. "Nathan just made junior partner at one of the top corporate law firms in the city," she gushed with obvious pride. "Princeton undergraduate, Yale Law School. Such a brilliant legal mind with an incredible future ahead of him. Nathan was everything I wasn't tall, perfectly groomed, and clearly expensive. He was the kind of guy who probably had his suits tailored and never had to check his bank balance before buying coffee or dinner. He talked about his recent bonus like it was casual conversation, mentioned the condo he'd just bought in the most desirable part of town, and outlined his detailed 5-year plan to make full partner like he was reading from a business school textbook. And Victoria, the woman who was supposed to be my fiancée, was absolutely eating it up. She was asking detailed questions about his work, laughing at his mediocre jokes, and showing more genuine interest in his career trajectory than she'd ever shown in mine. Every question she asked him felt like a small but deliberate betrayal, like she was comparing what he offered to what I could provide, and finding me severely lacking. I barely said 15 words during the entire evening. Every single time I tried to contribute something meaningful to the conversation, someone would politely listen for about 8 seconds before smoothly steering things back to Nathan's accomplishments or someone else's success story. I was watching Victoria transform into someone I didn't recognize at all. The girl who used to make fun of pretentious people and their shallow obsessions with status was suddenly becoming one of them right before my eyes. When we finally got back to my apartment that night, something fundamental had shifted in our relationship. She started complaining about things that had never bothered her before, like the broken elevator that had been out of order for months. She actually wrinkled her nose when Rusty jumped onto the bed, something that had been part of our nightly routine for years and had never been an issue. She mentioned how small and cramped the bathroom was, like she was seeing the place for the first time through completely different eyes. That's when I knew with absolute certainty that it was over. I just didn't realize she was going to make it official so soon, or that she would do it in such a devastating way. About a week later, Victoria showed up at my place after work, still wearing her business casual outfit from her marketing job at her dad's friend's company. This was a position she'd gotten without even having to interview. Just another example of how connections work when you have the right last name and move in the right social circles. She sat down across from me at my tiny IKEA dining table, the same table where we'd shared countless takeout dinners, hosted game nights with friends, and had late-night conversations about our future together. But I could tell immediately that this wasn't going to be one of those conversations. "We need to talk," she said, and I could tell she'd been rehearsing this speech for days. Every word sounded practiced and deliberate. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately," she continued, carefully avoiding eye contact. "About us, about my future, about what I really need in a relationship and in life." I knew exactly where this was heading, but I let her continue with her prepared speech anyway. There was no point in interrupting or trying to change her mind. Her decision had clearly been made long before this conversation ever started. "I love you, but I need stability in my life," she said, still staring at the table instead of looking at me. "I can't keep waiting indefinitely for you to figure everything out and get your life together. My family helped me realize that I need someone who's already established, someone who can provide the kind of life I deserve. Someone like Nathan." "Someone like Nathan," I repeated flatly, not even trying to hide the bitterness in my voice. She didn't even have the decency to look surprised that I'd connected the dots so easily. Of course, this was about Nathan. It had been building toward this moment since that dinner. "Yes, someone like Nathan," she said with increasing confidence, like she was relieved to finally be honest about what she really wanted. And then her carefully maintained facade completely slipped away, revealing who she really was underneath all the pretense. "Look, I tried to make this work," she said, gesturing around my cramped apartment like it was evidence of some fundamental moral failing on my part. "I really did try, but I can't keep pretending anymore that this is the kind of life I want for myself. Living in some rundown building constantly worrying about money, dating someone who can't even afford to take me somewhere nice for dinner." This was the exact same person who used to claim she loved our cozy nights in, who had repeatedly told me she didn't care about fancy restaurants or expensive things, who had said that money didn't matter as long as we were together. Now she was revealing that it had all been an act. "You're 27 years old and you're still playing with computers in your bedroom like you're 19, she continued, her voice getting sharper and more cruel with each word. "Nathan owns a condo downtown. He takes me to restaurants where people actually recognize him and treat him with respect. He doesn't have to save up for months just to buy a decent engagement ring." That last comment hit me like a physical blow to the chest. I had worked double shifts for 8 months to afford her engagement ring, sacrificing everything I could to buy her something meaningful and beautiful. It wasn't the biggest diamond in the world, but it was real, and I had been genuinely proud of what I'd managed to save up for. Now she was using it as ammunition to hurt me. Wow, I had no idea that's what you really thought about it, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. 4 years together, and you're telling me this now, Victoria? Why did you waste all that time if this is how you really felt? She continued with her brutal honesty, and every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into an open wound. I gave you 4 years to get your act together, she said, with the coldness of someone who had been keeping a mental scorecard this entire time. 4 years to become someone actually worth staying with. But you're still the exact same broke dreamer I met in college, except now you're older and it's just pathetic. The argument escalated quickly from there, with both of us saying things that couldn't be taken back. But then she did something I'll never forget for the rest of my life. Something that showed me exactly who she really was, underneath all the pretense and fake sweetness. She yanked the engagement ring off her finger with violent force and threw it directly at me. It bounced off my chest and clattered onto the floor with a hollow metallic sound that seemed to echo through the sudden silence. "Here, take your cheap ring back," she said with pure disgust dripping from every word. "Nathan's already talking about getting me a real ring from Tiffany's, not some discount jewelry store garbage." I stared down at the ring lying on the floor, the ring I had saved up for months to buy, working extra shifts and cutting every possible expense from my budget. The ring she had cried happy tears over just months ago when I proposed. The ring that had represented everything I hoped we would build together as a couple. Now it was just a piece of metal on my apartment floor, completely stripped of all the love and meaning I had put into it. "You know what's actually pathetic?" I said, standing up and looking her directly in the eyes. "Pretending to love someone for 4 years while secretly keeping score the entire time. Pretending to be someone you're not because you're too much of a coward to own your shallowness from the very beginning." Her face flushed bright red with anger and embarrassment. "At least I'm not wasting my entire life chasing some impossible dream that's never going to happen," she shot back. "At least I'm being realistic about what I want and need." "You're absolutely right," I said, bending down to pick up the ring from the floor. "You're not wasting your life anymore, you're just wasting mine, and I'm done letting you do it." She grabbed her purse with sudden urgency, clearly eager to leave now that she had said everything she came here to say. The mask was completely off now, and she didn't want to deal with the aftermath of her cruelty. "Nathan is picking me up at 8, she announced, the final twist of the knife. She wanted me to know that she was going straight from ending our engagement to a date with her upgrade, her replacement, her better option. "Good for you," I said, walking over to open the door for her. "I genuinely hope you're very happy together." Just 2 days later, 2 days after ending our 4-year relationship and engagement, she was Instagram official with Nathan. Not even a week had passed since she'd thrown my ring at me, and there they were in matching outfits at some luxury resort in Cape Cod. His arm was wrapped possessively around her waist. Her smile was wide and carefree, and the caption read, "Found my forever," with a heart emoji. Meanwhile, I was still sleeping on the same side of the bed we used to share, still finding her hair elastic bands in random places around the apartment, and still had half of her belongings scattered throughout my place because she hadn't found time to pick them up yet. The engagement ring sat on my dresser like a daily reminder of how incredibly stupid I had been to believe in forever with someone like her. I wish I could tell you that I immediately channeled my heartbreak into success, that I became some kind of tech mogul overnight through sheer force of will and determination. But that's complete movie nonsense. Real life is much messier and more complicated than that. The truth is, I spiraled hard. My startup crashed exactly 1 month after our breakup. Our investors pulled out after our prototype failed spectacularly during what was supposed to be our big breakthrough demo. The app crashed 4 times in the first 7 minutes, and when it finally managed to work, it ran so slowly that everyone in the room started checking their phones and having side conversations. It was a complete disaster that killed any chance we had of getting the funding we desperately needed. Tyler, my co-founder, took a job at Microsoft just 3 weeks later. I can't blame him for abandoning ship. He had massive student loans hanging over his head and a girlfriend who actually supported his career instead of constantly undermining it. He needed stability and a steady paycheck, something our failing startup clearly couldn't provide. I was suddenly completely alone with a failed company, a lease I couldn't afford, and savings that were disappearing faster than free food at a college event. I had to give up my apartment, but my friend Dylan saved my life during this period. This was a guy I'd known since freshman year who had never quite understood what I saw in Victoria, but had always supported me anyway. His place was even smaller than mine, a cramped one-bedroom where the living room doubled as his home office. But he cleared out half his closet without me even having to ask and let me and Rusty crash in his spare room for as long as we needed. Dylan's reaction when I showed up at his door with my entire life packed into garbage bags was exactly what I needed to hear. "Dude, I always knew she was high maintenance," he said, while helping me carry my stuff upstairs. "But damn, she really said your ring was cheap? That thing cost more than my car." Then after a pause, he added, "Well, my car is a piece of shit, but still. That's what real friendship looks like right there." Meanwhile, Victoria's perfect new life was playing out like a highlight reel on social media. Vacations to places I'd only seen in travel magazines, dinners at restaurants where the menu doesn't even have prices, spa weekends, and shopping trips that probably cost more than I used to make in a month. Every single post felt deliberately personal, like she was saying, "See? This is what I deserve. This is what you never could have given me." The absolute lowest point of this entire period came when I ran into Victoria and Nathan at a cafe downtown. I was there picking up an Uber Eats order because that's what my life had become. Driving around in 95-degree heat with broken air conditioning, delivering food to people who could afford to have meals brought to them. My car's AC had been broken for 4 months, and I couldn't afford to fix it, so I was driving around with the windows down, sweating through whatever clean shirt I had left. My phone was at 12% battery after an 11-hour shift, and I still had 5 more deliveries to complete if I wanted to hit my daily goal and make enough money to pay for gas and groceries. I looked exactly like what I was. Someone who was barely hanging on and doing whatever it took to survive. There they were, sitting outside like they'd stepped straight out of a lifestyle magazine. Victoria had this new expensive haircut, one of those styles that looks effortless, but probably took 3 hours and cost more than I made in an entire week of driving for Uber Eats. Nathan was wearing sunglasses that I'm pretty sure cost more than everything I was wearing combined. They were laughing about something, holding hands across the table, and looking like the absolute poster couple for living your best life. Nathan spotted me first, and I could see the malicious satisfaction in his expression immediately. "Well, well," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, clearly enjoying this moment. "Look who it is. Still delivering food, I see." His smirk was pure evil. This wasn't accidental recognition. He was genuinely enjoying seeing me in this position. Victoria looked up and saw me standing there in my wrinkled Uber Eats shirt, holding a bag of food that cost more than I'd spent on groceries in the past week. For just a split second, I thought I saw something flicker across her face. Maybe guilt, maybe regret. But then she smiled. She actually smiled at my misery, and the condescension was absolutely suffocating. I grabbed the bag of food and walked away without saying a single word, but I heard Nathan's voice carried just loud enough for me to catch. "Dodged a bullet there, didn't we?" And then I heard Victoria's laugh in response, a sound that used to bring me joy, but now felt like nails on a chalkboard. That moment completely broke something inside me. Standing there in the oppressive summer heat, sweating through my uniform while listening to my ex-fiancée and her new boyfriend openly mock my failures and circumstances, I hit rock bottom. That was the absolute last day I allowed myself to be anyone's joke or source of entertainment. I went home to Dylan's apartment that night and told him exactly what had happened. His response was perfect and exactly what I needed to hear. "Bro, that guy sounds like the kind of person who thinks mayo is spicy and she laughed. Nah, man, time to show these trust fund babies how the real world actually works." That conversation marked the turning point in my life. I made a decision that night to cut out everything that wasn't essential to my success. Social media got deleted from my phone entirely. I couldn't afford the distraction or the constant reminders of what other people had. Distractions, self-pity, negative people, everything had to go. I went into full rebuild mode like my life literally depended on it, because in many ways it did. Sleep became a luxury I simply couldn't afford. I was getting maybe 5 hours a night if I was lucky, and even that felt like too much. My days were dedicated to driving for Uber Eats, grinding through the heat and traffic to make enough money to survive. My evenings belonged to my night shift stocking shelves at the grocery store, where I'd spend hours moving boxes and restocking products while planning my comeback in my head. Any spare moment between jobs was spent rebuilding my startup from the ground up. But this time was completely different from my previous attempt. I had learned some hard lessons from my failure, and I wasn't going to repeat the same mistakes. No more chasing investors with half-baked ideas and flashy presentations that looked good but didn't solve real problems. I learned to bootstrap everything, to build something genuinely valuable and functional before asking anyone else for money or support. I also completely changed my approach to trusting people. No more believing in people easily or giving second chances to those who didn't deserve them. I kept my circle incredibly small, limiting it to just Dylan and a couple of other ride-or-die friends who had proven themselves when things got really ugly, and I needed support the most. Dylan was absolutely incredible throughout this entire period. He would bring me coffee during my late-night coding sessions when I was running on fumes and determination. He made sure I ate something more substantial than protein bars and instant ramen, even when I was too focused to think about proper nutrition. He never once complained about me turning his living room into a complete disaster zone with my computer equipment, papers, and general chaos. He even helped me land my first few enterprise clients through connections at his own job, never asking for anything in return except wanting to see me succeed. For 2 full years, I completely disappeared from Victoria's world. I had no idea what she was doing, who she was with, whether she was happy or struggling, whether her relationship with Nathan was working out. And honestly, I had reached a point where I genuinely stopped caring about any of it. While she was playing house with Nathan and posting about their perfect life, I was grinding harder than I'd ever worked in my entire life. My new startup idea came directly from the lessons I'd learned during my spectacular previous failure. Instead of trying to create some revolutionary consumer app that would magically change the world, I made a smart pivot to B2B software. Specifically, I focused on AI-powered contract analysis designed for law firms, boring, unglamorous work that nobody posts about on social media, but it solved a genuine problem that I had experienced firsthand. Dylan's take on this strategic pivot was hilarious. So you're basically building software to replace lawyers? Dude, you're going to save the world and get revenge at the same time. That's some next-level supervillain stuff right there. When I was trying to navigate legal documents during my first startup, I'd experienced firsthand how small law firms were completely drowning in paperwork, spending countless hours on tasks that could easily be automated with the right technology. Our software could analyze complex contracts, spot potential issues and red flags, and highlight important clauses in seconds instead of requiring hours of human review. More importantly, people were actually willing to pay substantial money for this kind of efficiency and accuracy. Then everything began to change dramatically. It started small, just a mention in an industry publication, a glowing testimonial from a satisfied client that opened new doors, word-of-mouth recommendations that spread through legal circles. Suddenly, people were talking about this new tool that could do the work of junior associates at a fraction of the cost and with greater accuracy. The transformation was incredible. Instead of desperately chasing potential clients and begging for meetings, I wasn't chasing anyone anymore. They were calling me, eager to learn more about what we could offer their firms. The phone was ringing constantly with inquiries from law firms who had heard about our capabilities and wanted to see demonstrations. My team during this period was absolutely incredible. These were people who genuinely believed in the vision we were building together, who worked just as hard as I did, and who became like family to me during the most important phase of my career. The culture we built was everything I dreamed of when I first started my entrepreneurial journey. Tyler actually reached out during this explosive growth phase, saying he wanted to come back to the startup world. He told me that Microsoft was fine and stable, but he missed the energy and excitement of building something from the ground up. I told him we were good without him, not out of spite or revenge, but because the team I had assembled was rock solid and I didn't want to disrupt the chemistry we developed. Within just a few months, we were scaling at an incredible pace. Really fast growth that exceeded even my most optimistic projections. We landed a massive contract with one of the top 7 law firms in the entire country, which immediately led to more contracts, more industry recognition, and more investors desperately wanting to get involved with what we were building. The company that had literally started in Dylan's cramped living room was suddenly opening offices in London and Singapore. We were expanding globally and disrupting an entire industry that had operated the exact same way for decades. Law firms that had been resistant to change were suddenly scrambling to adapt or get left behind. But here's the beautiful irony that made everything even sweeter. Our biggest market disruption was happening specifically in corporate law, and even more specifically in financial services law. This was the exact area where Nathan worked, the exact field where he had built his supposedly impressive career and reputation. Our AI tools were systematically making junior associates obsolete, automating all the grunt work and basic research that guys like Nathan had built their early careers on. The tedious document review, Contract analysis and legal research that had traditionally required hours of expensive human labor could now be completed in minutes with greater accuracy. When I finally realized this connection, Dylan nearly choked on his coffee from laughing so hard. Wait, he said, wiping tears from his eyes. You're telling me that your company is literally putting trust fund lawyers out of business, and Captain America wannabe has absolutely no idea that you're the one behind it. The first time I saw Victoria again after my transformation was at a major industry conference. This time, I wasn't attending as some desperate entrepreneur hoping to network my way into opportunities. I was there as a featured speaker on the main stage, talking about how artificial intelligence was fundamentally reshaping legal services to an audience packed with executives, investors, and industry leaders. After my presentation, I was surrounded by people who wanted to do business with us, shake hands, and discuss potential partnerships. That's when I spotted Victoria's parents across the room, and the change in their demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. Her mother's champagne glass literally froze halfway to her lips when she recognized me. Her father, who had once mockingly dismissed my little computer project at his dinner table, gave me a slow, respectful nod that acknowledged everything had changed. Then I saw Victoria herself. She was standing off to the side, completely frozen in place, staring at me like she'd just seen a ghost. She looked good, but there was something different about her, something diminished. The carefree confidence that had dominated all her Instagram posts was nowhere to be seen. She looked smaller somehow, less sure of herself. We didn't approach each other during the conference. We didn't speak or acknowledge each other directly, but I could see the exact moment when the realization hit her like a freight train. The moment she understood that the pathetic guy she'd abandoned was now more successful than anyone in her family's entire social circle, more influential than the people who had once looked down on me. Dylan's text message when I told him about seeing her was perfect. Did she look like she just realized she fumbled the bag? Please tell me she looked like she just realized she completely fumbled the bag. From that night forward, everything accelerated at an almost unbelievable pace. Word travels incredibly fast in certain circles, especially when someone goes from zero to hero in just a couple of years. Within weeks of that conference, I started getting invitations to exclusive events I'd never even heard of. The kind of gatherings where serious business gets done and important connections are made. Victoria's father personally reached out to invite me to one of these high-profile events. I accepted the invitation, not because I wanted their approval or validation, but because I knew exactly what this was really about. They wanted to be associated with my success now that it was undeniable. They wanted to be able to say they knew me when I was nobody, even though they had treated me like garbage back then. When I arrived at the event, fashionably late because why not make an entrance, I immediately spotted Victoria and Nathan across the room. Nathan looked completely different from the confident, smug man I'd encountered at the cafe. He looked stressed, anxious, and defeated. His shoulders were tense, he kept obsessively checking his phone, and he had this haunted look that comes from knowing your world is falling apart, but being powerless to stop it. His law firm had been hemorrhaging clients to companies exactly like mine. Traditional law firms across the industry were struggling desperately to compete with AI-powered efficiency and innovation. The old guard was panicking, trying frantically to adapt to new technology they didn't understand and couldn't effectively implement. They were losing business left and right to younger, more innovative companies that could deliver better results faster and at a fraction of the traditional cost. Nathan probably still didn't know that I was personally behind his professional problems, but he was definitely feeling the intense pressure. Meanwhile, Victoria knew exactly who I was and what I had accomplished. When our eyes met across the crowded room, I saw the same expression from the conference, but much worse. It was pure, undeniable regret mixed with the dawning realization of what she had thrown away. About a week after that event, Victoria reached out to me directly. I had deleted her number years ago during my social media purge, but her message still came through on my phone. "Hey, it's been a while," she wrote. "I was wondering if we could catch up sometime. Just talk." The message was casual, almost nonchalant, like we were old friends who had simply lost touch rather than former fiancés whose relationship had ended in mutual destruction. I ignored the message completely. I didn't even bother reading it twice. Then she made what I can only describe as a desperate move. She actually showed up at my office unannounced. My team had already left for the day, and I was staying late to finish reviewing some important contracts when the security guard called up to my floor. "There's a woman here asking to see you," he said, sounding uncertain. Says it's important and urgent. I didn't need him to describe her. I knew exactly who it was. I debated for several minutes whether to have security escort her out immediately, but then I realized this was actually my moment. The moment I'd been unconsciously preparing for since the day she walked out of my life with such cruelty. This was my chance to face her as the successful man I'd become. So I told security to let her up. She walked into my corner office very hesitantly, looking around at the modern furniture, the awards mounted on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows with stunning city views. Everything was so completely different from the cramped apartment we'd once shared, where we'd eaten takeout on a second-hand futon and watched Netflix on a laptop with a cracked screen. Her confidence was completely gone. The dismissive attitude and superiority complex had been replaced by something I'd never seen from her before. Genuine nervousness and uncertainty. She looked like someone who knew she was in over her head, but had nowhere else to turn. "Hey," she said softly, giving me what she probably thought was a charming, sad smile. "It's been a while, hasn't it?" I leaned back in my expensive leather chair, crossed my arms, and said absolutely nothing. I just watched her fidget uncomfortably under my steady gaze, letting the silence stretch between us until it became almost unbearable. She took a deep breath, clearly steeling herself for what she'd come here to say. "I was wrong about everything," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "I listened to my family and threw away something real and meaningful." She bit her lip, searching my face desperately for any sign of reaction or softening. "I miss you. I miss us." "Us?" I repeated, letting just a hint of amusement creep into my voice. She nodded quickly, hope flickering in her eyes like she thought she might actually have a chance. "I know I hurt you badly, and I know I made terrible mistakes. But maybe we could start over, try again. Maybe we could build something even better than what we had before." I stared at her for a long moment, then started laughing. Not angrily, not bitterly, but with genuine amusement at the absurdity of what she was suggesting. "Start over?" I repeated, shaking my head in disbelief. "Victoria, we ended the day you chose them over me, the day you decided I wasn't good enough for the life you thought you deserved." She winced as the words hit home, but I wasn't anywhere close to being done. "You didn't want me when I was broke and struggling. You didn't believe in me when I was working my ass off to build something meaningful. You called me pathetic and left me for someone with a better bank account and social connections. But now that I've made it, now that I'm successful beyond anything you imagined possible, suddenly you want back in?" Her face fell as the harsh reality of her situation became crystal clear. I stood up from my chair, straightening my perfectly tailored suit jacket, the kind of expensive clothing I could never have afforded when we were together. "Victoria, I don't think about you anymore," I said with complete honesty. "I don't miss you, I don't wonder what you're doing, and I sure as hell don't need you in my life." That's exactly when my office door opened and my girlfriend walked in. Sophia was a brilliant product designer I'd met at a tech conference, someone who had believed in our company when we were still working out of Dylan's apartment and had nothing but potential. She was a gorgeous, intelligent woman who made Victoria look like a shallow Instagram influencer by comparison. Victoria's face went completely white when she saw Sophia. The blood drained from her cheeks as she realized that not only had I moved on, but I'd moved on to someone who was clearly in a completely different league. I turned to Sophia, giving her a warm, genuine smile before looking back at Victoria. "You see, I did find someone in my league," I said calmly. "It turns out it just wasn't you." I walked Victoria to the elevator personally and watched the doors close between us. It should have felt like victory, like the ultimate revenge fantasy coming true. But honestly, it just felt like closing a book I'd finished reading years ago. There was no anger, no satisfaction, just the quiet closure of something that had been over for a long time. But that confrontation in my office wasn't the end of this story. It was just the opening move of the endgame. The real satisfaction was still coming, and it would be far more devastating than anything I could have planned. A few weeks later, word started spreading rapidly through legal circles that Nathan's firm was in serious trouble. My company's AI-powered tools had been systematically replacing traditional legal services at an alarming rate throughout the industry. We were faster, cheaper, more accurate, and infinitely more efficient than human lawyers doing the same work. We could complete complex analyses in minutes that they charged clients hundreds of dollars per hour to finish over days or weeks. Nathan's firm was bleeding money at an unprecedented rate, desperately trying to compete with technology they didn't understand and couldn't possibly match with their outdated methods. They were stuck in the past, while the entire industry was rapidly evolving around them. Instead of adapting and embracing innovation, the old guard partners were panicking and making increasingly desperate moves that only accelerated their decline, losing even more clients in the process. I heard through industry contacts that Nathan was having a complete psychological breakdown behind closed doors. He was working 95-plus-hour weeks, screaming at junior associates over minor mistakes, and desperately trying to retain their biggest clients through increasingly frantic and unprofessional behavior. The pressure was destroying him from the inside out. Dylan's take on this development was absolutely perfect. So the guy who mocked you for playing with computers is now getting completely destroyed by computers? That's some poetic justice right there. Meanwhile, investors were pulling their funding from Nathan's firm, viewing it as an outdated dinosaur in a market they no longer understood or could compete in effectively. The legal industry was transforming rapidly, and firms that couldn't adapt were being left behind permanently. The beautiful irony was that Nathan still hadn't figured out that I was the mastermind behind his career meltdown. While Nathan was crumbling professionally, Victoria's parents went into full damage control mode. They had spent years treating me like some broke loser who wasn't worthy of their daughter's time or attention. Now they were witnessing my meteoric rise while their golden boy choice was falling apart spectacularly. The desperate attempts to reconnect with me started almost immediately after my industry conference appearance. Victoria's mother began sending polite, carefully crafted emails congratulating me on my remarkable success. Her father started mentioning me favorably in interviews, calling me one of the most promising entrepreneurs of this decade, and acting like he'd always believed in my potential. They invited me to exclusive business events, framing them as valuable networking opportunities where I could meet other successful people. I ignored absolutely all of it. Their sudden change of heart was transparently self-serving. Then Victoria's father called me directly, which took considerable audacity given our history. I answered purely out of curiosity, wondering what he could possibly have to say to me now. "I think we should talk, son," he said, his tone artificially warm and familiar. "About potential business opportunities, possible partnerships, synergies between our networks. Water under the bridge, you know?" I let him ramble on for several minutes about collaborations and mutual benefits before he finally got to the real point of his call. "Listen, Victoria made a mistake," he said, his voice becoming more desperate. "I know that. We all know that now. But she's been having a really rough time lately with everything that's happening, and I think if you two just sat down and talked things through." I hung up on him mid-sentence without saying a word. There was no genuine apology in anything he said. No real accountability for how his family had treated me. Just pure, calculated damage control now that they realized they'd backed the wrong horse. That was the last time I ever took any of their calls. The moment when Nathan finally realized who was behind his professional downfall was absolutely perfect, and I was there to witness it firsthand. I was speaking at another major industry conference, this time on a panel about the future of artificial intelligence in legal services. The CEO of a major law firm publicly praised my company during the discussion, saying, "Honestly, these guys are completely changing the game. Some of the biggest traditional firms are struggling desperately to keep up with this level of innovation." The camera panned across the audience to capture reactions, and there was Nathan in the third row. His face was completely drained of color, his expression a mixture of shock, horror, and dawning realization. You could literally see the exact moment when everything clicked into place for him. I wasn't just his ex-girlfriend's loser ex-boyfriend anymore. I was the man who was systematically destroying his career and everything he'd worked for. That night, Nathan completely snapped under the pressure. I got a text from a mutual contact in the legal industry. "Bro, Nathan just absolutely lost his shit in a partner meeting. You need to hear about this." Apparently, during a firm-wide strategy session, one of the senior partners brought up my company as an example of the kind of innovation they needed to compete with, or at least understand. Nathan completely lost control and started screaming about how I was just a lucky fraud, how my company would inevitably crash and burn, and how traditional legal practices would always win in the end. The problem was that everyone in that room was staring at him like he'd completely lost his mind. They were finally realizing that Nathan wasn't the future of their firm. I was the future of the entire industry, and he represented everything that was being left behind. But I still had one final move to make, and it would be the ultimate checkmate in this entire saga. A few months later, my company was ready for its biggest acquisition yet. We were buying out a smaller but highly influential legal firm that happened to be a direct competitor to Nathan's company. This wasn't just business anymore. This was the final nail in the coffin. Once the acquisition deal was officially finalized, We immediately began poaching several of Nathan's biggest and most profitable clients. We offered them superior service, cutting-edge technology, and significantly lower costs than what they were paying for outdated traditional methods. Within 8 months, Nathan's firm was hemorrhaging so much business that they were forced to merge with a larger competitor just to survive financially. Nathan went from being a rising junior partner with a bright future to just another employee struggling to stay relevant. He was probably doing the exact same grunt work he'd once smugly bragged about escaping years earlier. The golden boy who had everything handed to him throughout his privileged life was now just another lawyer desperately trying to stay relevant in an industry that had completely passed him by. But the story wasn't over yet. Victoria was about to make one final, absolutely desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of her choices. It was 4 weeks after Nathan's firm had officially merged, essentially admitting defeat. Victoria showed up at my office again, but this time was dramatically different from her previous visit. This wasn't the nervous but hopeful woman who had tried to charm her way back into my life. This was desperation in its purest, most raw form. It was a Friday evening around 7:30 p.m. Most of my team had left for happy hour, but I was staying late to finish reviewing some important contracts for our latest expansion. The security guard called up to my office, sounding genuinely uncertain about what to do. "Sir, there's a woman here," he said hesitantly. "She's pretty upset, crying actually. Says she needs to see you urgently about something important." "Let her up," I said calmly. I had a strong feeling I knew exactly who it was, and I was curious to see just how far she'd fallen. When the elevator doors opened, I barely recognized the person who stepped out. Gone completely was the polished, put-together woman I'd known for 4 years. Her hair was an absolute mess. Her makeup was smudged like she'd been crying for hours, and she was wearing jeans and a wrinkled sweater. Clothing so casual that I'd never seen her wear anything remotely like it, even back when we were together and supposedly happy. "Thank God you're here," she said, rushing into my office without being invited or waiting for permission. "I've been calling you, texting you constantly. Why won't you answer me? Why won't you talk to me?" I stayed seated calmly behind my desk, maintaining my composure. "Because we have absolutely nothing to talk about, Victoria." "Yes, we do!" she practically shouted, her voice cracking with emotion. "I left him. I left Nathan. It's completely over between us." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing, just waited for her to continue explaining herself. "His firm collapsed," she continued, starting to pace frantically around my office like a caged animal. "He lost everything, his job, his status, his money, his future prospects. And all he did was blame me for everything that went wrong. He said it was my fault for leaving you, that I'd ruined both our lives by making the wrong choice." She was getting more agitated with every word. "So I'm done with all of it. I'm completely done with him and that whole world." "Good for you," I said flatly, without any emotion or investment in her situation. She stopped pacing abruptly and stared at me with wide, desperate eyes. "Don't you get it?" she said, her voice rising to an almost hysterical pitch. "I'm free now. We can be together again. We can start over fresh and build something real this time." I almost laughed out loud at the sheer audacity of what she was suggesting. "Start over?" I repeated, unable to hide my disbelief. "I made a mistake," she said, her voice getting higher and more desperate with each word. "The biggest mistake of my entire life. I should never have left you for him. You were right about everything. My family, Nathan. All of those shallow people and their empty values. But I'm here now, and I'm choosing you. I'm finally choosing the right person." She moved closer to my desk, her eyes wild with desperation and something that looked almost like madness. "I know you still love me," she continued frantically. "What we had was real love, the kind that doesn't just disappear. That kind of deep connection doesn't just vanish." "You're absolutely right," I said, standing up slowly. "Real love doesn't just disappear or fade away." Her face lit up with hope for just a moment. "But what we had wasn't real love, Victoria," I continued coldly. "That's not what love looks like." Her face completely crumpled as the words hit home like physical blows. "That's not true," she said desperately, shaking her head like she could will reality to be different. "You left me the moment something supposedly better came along," I said with brutal honesty. "That's not love, Victoria. That's convenience. That's opportunism." "I was confused," she protested, her voice breaking. "My family pressured me constantly. I was young and stupid and didn't know what I really wanted." "You were 24 years old, Victoria," I replied coldly. "You weren't a child. You were a grown woman who made a conscious choice to abandon someone who loved you for someone who could give you a better lifestyle. That's when she completely broke down. She started crying, not just tearing up, but ugly sobbing that shook her entire body. "Please, I'm begging you," she said through her tears. "I have nothing left. Absolutely nothing. My parents won't even take my calls anymore because I'm not with Nathan. All my friends from that world have disappeared. You're all I have left." "I'm not your anything," I said with ice-cold finality. "I'm also with someone else now, someone who actually matters to me. You need to move on with your life." She suddenly grabbed my arm with both hands, her grip desperate and almost painful. "I was wrong about the ring," she said frantically. "It was beautiful. It was perfect. I was just scared of what my family would think. I was young and terrified of disappointing them." I pulled my arm away from her grasp firmly. "Don't do this to yourself." But she couldn't stop the flood of desperation that was pouring out of her. "I'll do anything," she said, her voice reaching a pitch that was almost unrecognizable. "I'll change everything about myself. I'll work, I'll support your dreams. I'll be the woman you need me to be. Just please take me back. Please give me another chance. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was with him." "No, Victoria, you need to leave my office right now." "No!" She screamed so loudly that I was sure people on other floors could hear her. "You don't understand what you're doing to me. I made one mistake, one terrible mistake. You can't punish me forever for one bad decision." That's when I had no choice but to call security. I reached for my phone calmly. "What are you doing?" she demanded, panic overtaking her features. "I'm calling security to escort you out." She actually lunged for the phone, trying to physically stop me from making the call. "Don't you dare!" she screamed. "You can't just throw me out like garbage, not after everything we meant to each other." I easily moved the phone out of her reach and dialed security. "I need someone to escort a visitor out of my office immediately," I said into the phone. "You bastard!" she screamed at the top of her lungs. "I loved you! I gave you the best years of my life! How can you be so cruel?" Tony, our security guard, arrived within minutes. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," he said professionally but firmly. "No, you don't understand!" she shouted at Tony, then spun back to face me one last time. "I'm offering you everything, my whole life, my complete devotion. How can you just throw that away like it means nothing?" I looked at her and said absolutely nothing. There was nothing left to say. Tony gently but firmly guided her toward the elevator while she continued yelling and crying hysterically. "That bitch you're with is only with you for your money!" she screamed as the elevator doors began to close. "When you're old and alone and she takes everything from you, you'll remember that I was the one who really loved you." The elevator doors closed, and she was gone from my life forever. I stood there for a moment in the complete silence of my office, processing what had just happened. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Dylan. Just had Victoria escorted out by security. She completely lost it. His reply was immediate and perfect. "Bro, please tell me someone got video of that. That sounds like prime YouTube content right there." Entitled Ex-Fiancé, has epic meltdown at tech office would get millions of views. I couldn't help but laugh despite everything that had just happened. Even in the aftermath of that absolute insanity, Dylan knew exactly how to put things in perspective and make me smile. In the end, I didn't need to destroy Victoria's life. She did that herself by trading real love for status symbols. When that status disappeared and those symbols proved to be hollow, she was left with absolutely nothing. Not even her dignity remained intact. The best revenge wasn't actively destroying their lives through some elaborate scheme. It was simply living my life better without them, building something meaningful, and becoming the person I was always capable of being. Success was the ultimate vindication, and watching them self-destruct was just a bonus I never could have planned.